And as promised, now we are having a conversation on from campaigns to COVID to City Hall, reporting on the race for mayor. Again, I'm Michael Hendricks, Director of State and Local Policy here at the Manhattan Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome Jeff Colton. He's a senior reporter for City and State. Jeff has a deep knowledge of New York politics. He's been reporting the race for mayor. Also, please subscribe to his newsletter. It's fantastic. All right, so Jeff, in the time that we have, I want to cover a lot of ground. So let's get started. Big picture, where are we in the contest for New York City's next mayor?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. And we are still pretty early in the race for mayor, I think. I look at it this way. If you are a typical New York City voter, right now you can avoid the race if you want. You don't have to be thinking about it. I think that's going to change relatively soon. The month of May, certainly June, once early voting starts, when we get closer to that June 22nd primary date. TV is going to be constant ads, the front of all the newspapers, radio ads. I'm sure there's going to start to be the trucks driving around that have advertisements on the side saying vote for Stringer, vote for Adams. I've already seen a Scott Stringer bus driving around the city. So that hasn't happened yet. I think I've seen a few Diane Morales posters in some bodega windows. I don't think I've seen any other candidates put posters up yet. There's a few candidates that are on TV, Ray Mcguire, Sean Donovan, maybe you've seen them if you're watching. But long story short, we're still early. And even though Andrew Yang has consistently led every public poll so far, I don't think that even the Yang campaign will say that that's necessarily going to hold over the next 2.5 months.
Jeff, I don't know if you find this dispiriting to have to say after endless Zoom meetings, this is just getting started and we're only at the beginning. It seems like, as with almost any political race, it goes on forever. And the moment it ends, another one begins. All right, so stepping back a little bit, how are the candidates from your perspective positioning themselves and running their campaigns? It seems like, and I wonder about your take on this, it seems like there are three lanes. There's the progressive lane, the experienced lane, and the Andrew Yang. What's your take?
I think that's a pretty good analysis. I would say definitely in the progressive lane, you clearly have New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer. You have Maya Wiley, former counsel to Mayor Bill de Blasio, and you have Diane Morales, former nonprofit CEO. They're all very much running in the progressive lane, and we've seen them split some endorsements. Most recently, the Working Families Party endorsed all of them in a ranking order of Stringer, Morales, Wiley. The experience lane, sure, you've got Eric Adams, Brooklyn Borough President, who, like Scott Stringer, has a career in politics, but is running a more moderate, not progressive campaign. So Eric Adams, you've got Sean Donovan, who was Obama's budget director and also a commissioner of housing for Michael Bloomberg, and Catherine Garcia, who's been de Blasio's fixer and also most recently like sanitation commissioner. And then Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang is his own thing. He got true fame from running for president. And the one thing that I'll say that stands out from there is Ray Mcguire. Ray Mcguire is probably fits more into the Andrew Yang mold. He himself doesn't have any government or political experience, but I think he is kind of running an experience campaign like the other candidates I was talking about. It's just his experience happens to come from his position as a vice chairman of Citigroup and his 27 years on Wall Street, or maybe even more than that. So yeah, I think that is a fair assessment. That is definitely the 8 serious candidates for the Democratic nomination.
And then just give us a quick sense of how the polls are shaping up right now. You mentioned Andrew Yang has consistently been at the top, but who else is below that? Is there any clear message that comes out of it? And how much should we even trust the polls at this point in time?
So the polls are, starting to come fast and furious. We've seen 3 of them released just in the past week, to varying levels of legitimacy. I mean, they're all serious polls. They were all scientifically done. We're all still very eager to get like a Quinnipiac or like a Marist poll that's just kind of universally considered to be not rooting for a candidate and just done that way. But hey, we will work with what we have, and all the polls have been generally showing the same thing. That's Andrew Yang in first place, somewhere around anywhere from 20 to 30%. Then you've got Eric Adams, almost always in a solid second place, and then you've got Scott Stringer and Maya Wiley, usually right around 3 and 4, maybe around like 10%, somewhere there. And then everybody else is just kind of lower. And that's Mcguire, Garcia, Donovan, and Morales.
And of course, one change that affects polling would also affect what it means to go to the polls. And that's, of course, ranked choice voting. So, when you look at a poll and just say, for instance, and by the way, the polls are not necessarily doing this now, but if you were to just ask, who's the most popular candidate, who would you pick? That's not going to tell you necessarily how the actual primary is going to shape out because, well, there's ranked choice voting. So again, while we're in this conversation on the basics, just for the audience, give a sense of what is ranked choice voting, and how is this in any way affecting the race for mayor right now?
Yeah, everything is. Yeah, it's very much affecting the race for mayor, and great thing to talk about. This is going to be the first big citywide election with the use of ranked choice voting. Voters passed it in a charter revision commission back in 2019, and it's all new in New York City. They have used it in the city of San Francisco, the state of Maine, so it's not like a brand new idea. But New York City is the largest venue for ranked choice polling, ranked choice voting, at least in the United States. For voters, the system is you just get to rank 1 up to 5 of your favorite candidates. That's for mayor, comptroller, borough president, city council. It's going to be all the city races except for Manhattan District Attorney. So remember that Manhattan District Attorney is technically a state race, so you won't be able to rank. But everything else, voters get to rank 1 through 5, and it's very much affecting the race. Like you said, even with polling, there might be some strategic voters out there who are ranking differently than their top choice. To get into a specific example here, if you are a progressive, you might really want to, encourage Diane Morales. You might like her platform. You might rank her first, but then you're kind of hedging your bets and maybe putting Scott Stringer second or third or fourth or even fifth below her, saying that, sure, Stringer is leading in the poll ahead of Morales in the polls, has a better chance of lasting longer in the ranked choice voting runoff, instant runoff scenario. So yeah, that's just one example of how it could affect the polling versus the voting. And it's going to be fascinating. And we haven't seen any formal partnerships yet among the mayoral candidates, but everybody's kind of waiting to see if there will be.
You've had some informal partnerships. Andrew Yang talks up Catherine Garcia. They've made joint appearances together. It's not like some sort of cross endorsement, but that is seems like maybe an unusual occurrence that you don't often see in a mayoral race.
Yeah, definitely. And right, I think the Yang and Garcia one was maybe the best example. That was basically Andrew Yang kind of hosting Catherine Garcia at one of his press conferences and saying, hey, I really like her idea here. Like, I'm going to use that, and kind of playing her up. And, we've also seen that to various extents, especially with like Diane Morales and Maya Wiley at polls when they're asked who would they rank second. They've often, not always, but often said, I would rank Wiley second, or I'd rank Morales second. So yes, nothing formal yet, but there's been some kind of informal, hey, maybe we're going to see some patterns of voting here. However, there have been some special elections in the past few months for city council races that have used ranked choice voting. We've seen some formal partnerships there where candidates explicitly said, hey, vote for this candidate second, rank me first, rank them second. And, small sample size, only one special election, but the voters haven't necessarily listened. The voters didn't all rank them 1-2 or 2-1. They ranked other candidates in the same place. So we'll see if that happens for the mayor's race, whether voters listen to the candidates or whether they just, fill out their ballot in a different way.
Right. So it's also worth pointing out that in the races that have used ranked choice voting so far, in the race that has used it, the world hasn't ended. Right. There's been a lot of a kind of apocalyptic rhetoric around ranked choice voting seems like for those who did turn out, they maybe understood the ranked choice process. And the candidates who we kind of thought, if you're following these races closely, you kind of thought would come out ahead, came out ahead. I mean, it wasn't necessarily a shocking result, but nevertheless, of course, we're going to see the real contest coming up. And it's also worth keeping in mind, if you are following polls closely, you can certainly disagree with me, Jeff, but if you're following the polls closely, you want to look not just at who's number one, maybe it's Andrew Yang, but also who from the other candidates competing against Andrew Yang, where do their votes go in their second choice? And, if Andrew Yang seems to be attracting the second choice from a lot of other candidates, maybe he's in an even stronger position than you would otherwise think from, say, just 20 to 30% support across the whole contest. Is that basically right?
Yeah, and Yang right now, he's not only popular, but he is not particularly polarizing. Even people that don't rank him first, even people that don't love Andrew Yang, are still ranking him on their ballots. And I think all the other candidates are going to work hard to make Yang polarizing and to make sure that if you don't love Andrew Yang, then you dislike Andrew Yang, or you don't think he should be mayor. That's kind of going to be the key to the next few months here, seeing if other campaigns or even independent groups are able to shift there and make Yang a more polarizing candidate. Because broadly, RCV, or ranked choice voting, has a lot of proponents and a lot of reasons why people like it. That's one of them, is that it's supposed to be able to elect candidates that are more broadly acceptable and not elevating candidates that are particularly polarizing.
Right. So, all right. So have there been any big surprises in the race so far? Again, with the caveat that in some respects we're just getting started. Maybe Yang's entrance was one big surprise, but it also seems like the field is waiting for some big reveal. The constant refrain is, remember last time, not the last mayoral contest, but Bill de Blasio's first contest when he ran. He was not ahead, but then somebody named Anthony Weiner who was in the race, stuff happened. And the field is kind of waiting for it seems like something similar to happen, some big bang that shakes up the race. If Andrew Yang's entrance was one of them, what else have we seen? It maybe not as big as Anthony Weiner's revelations last time around.
I agree that there's this sense of, whether there's going to be an October surprise. Of course, it'll be a June primary, so maybe it'll be a May surprise or something. And look, as a journalist, I'm hoping I get to break that story. I'm hoping that I get to find out, the story that shakes up this race.
Right. If you have tips, please send them to Jeff right now.
Yes, exactly. But look, at this point, there isn't anything. I don't know of anything that's, gonna break and shake up this race. But you never know. I'm thinking of 1 year ago, with the death of George Floyd and then the protests that followed. Policing and Black Lives Matter had always been an issue, at least in the past few years. But that death and the protests really brought it to the forefront. And you never know what could happen here, whether something happens that brings one issue to the top of all voters' minds. Same thing with coronavirus. That came on relatively quickly, where candidates that could talk about that were elevated. So we will see what happens in the next 2 months. But as for surprises so far in the race, yes, of course, Yang's entrance was a huge one. But also going farther back, some candidates that we thought would be leading contenders in the mayoral race decided not to run. Corey Johnson decided to run for comptroller instead, the New York City Council Speaker. Ruben Diaz Jr., who's the Bronx Borough president, everybody thought he would be a real top contender for this job. He decided more than a year ago to drop out and not run. And more recently, Christine Quinn, former city council speaker, she was thinking about running. She decided not to. Congressman Max Rose. So I'd say the biggest surprises for me so far have just been who jumped in, i.e. Andrew Yang, and who jumped out, i.e. those other candidates.
Right. And the big surprise was in many respects a kind of a meta surprise of coronavirus and a pandemic. And now all of a sudden you have to completely change how you campaign. And so that actually kind of, for me, begs the question of what it's been like to report this race during a global pandemic. Endless Zoom forums clearly have to be part of that too. You're probably over them now, but thank you for, of course, doing this one. So yeah, how has reporting changed for you during this past year, the meta surprise of COVID-19 and others along the way?
I guess I'll start with the optimistic take. I've been able to cover more than I ever could have in a typical race. I was able to cover, 3 or 4 mayoral forums in one night once, because it's just jumping from Zoom to Zoom. If these were in person, I'd be spending a fortune on Ubers, going from Queens to Brooklyn and the Bronx in one night. So that is actually a positive aspect. And I mean, honestly, that's true for anybody that wants to be paying attention to the mayor's race. It's practically easier than ever this year because anybody can tune in to these live streams and these Zooms and learn about the candidates. Whereas in a typical year, 2017, 2013, whatever, if you wanted to, listen to the candidates, learn about them, you would have to give up 2 hours of your night or more and go in person to one of these events to hear from them. So that's an optimistic take. The negative side of it is that I'm definitely seeing less of voters and I'm seeing less of candidate interaction with voters. That is changing, certainly, as people get vaccinated, as the weather is warming up. This race is shifting sooner rather than later to a more typical race with in-person campaigning and candidates flyering outside of Zabars as just happened. So I'm looking forward to that aspect of it.
Yeah. Are you seeing or do you foresee any shift in how you perceive either the race or the candidates as you move in person?
As always, Andrew Yang is the real question here. It's been very funny being a political reporter, not just a reporter, but one who works for City and State, a publication that's kind of focused on people that generally work in and around politics and government. Our readership is a population that doesn't necessarily like Andrew Yang. We did an informal survey of our readers, and Yang came in like last place of the poll because he doesn't have experience or really even a record of interest in local politics. So that's, when I'm talking to all my typical consultants and campaign workers, there's not a lot of Andrew Yang support. Then you go out into the wider world. I was walking around Times Square with Andrew Yang about a month ago. And oh my goodness, I mean, the support is real and the support is diverse. I was most impressed by that. This wasn't just, young white guys like myself that were going up to Yang. This was people of all ages, all races. I mean, people know Yang and they really generally have a really good feeling about the guy. He just has kind of positive associations. So that's just one small example. And I'm sure there's going to be so many more as candidates continue to go out in person and, get their name recognition up among the voters.
Mm-hmm. And that is remarkable how there can be these very distinct conversations between those who you might class as political insiders and those who are just in the broader population. And it's funny in how many contests outside of New York, you've seen a similar dichotomy between what people on the inside are saying and feeling and sensing and wanting and desiring and what the rest of the population is saying. We can certainly come back to that, but I did want to dive in a little bit more into the individual candidates. Maybe ask this kind of an unusual way. So how might, from what you've been seeing, how might a Maya Wiley city differ from an Andrew Yang city? Help us have a window into their vision for the city then.
Sure, that's two good candidates to compare. I think in many ways, Wiley's city hall would be in the mold of de Blasio, very public sector focused, very progressive in speech and in act. Wiley is working hard to distance herself from the relatively unpopular mayor. But she was his chief counsel for 2.5 years and was an appointee of his for a year beyond that. So there's definitely a lot of political alignment between the two. So very public sector focused, government can get us out of this. Big government, I'm sure most likely City Hall would continue to grow under Mayor Wiley. Yang would be much more in the vein of a Mayor Bloomberg, much more emphasis on the private sector. As I said, he doesn't have experience in city government or politics. I think he would be relying more on appointees than a Mayor Wiley, even more so. And it's, again, Yang is not perfectly politically aligned with the Mayor Bloomberg. In fact, they ran against each other in the presidential race. But I think that's the general sense. It would be very private sector focused, and that's where we would see a difference.
That's very helpful. All right, so here's another one. What about Adams versus Stringer? So Eric Adams versus Scott Stringer. Maybe, as you said, Eric Adams would be maybe under the experienced lane and Scott Stringer under the progressive lane, but both have had a lot of years in public service. Both have also seen endorsements by notable public sector unions. There's a lot of insiders who support them or at least aware of them. So is there really any substantive difference between an Eric Adams city versus a Scott Stringer city?
Definitely a substantive difference. Yeah, I mean, look, both of them are running on their experience in different ways. Both of them have worked in politics for a long time, been elected before, one citywide in Stringer, one in the biggest borough in Adams. And both of them are definitely leading the endorsement race. A lot of endorsements from, yes, the biggest unions, elected officials, that sort of thing. Look, Adams can be hard to categorize politically, but he's generally a more moderate, pro-growth politician. He talks a lot about government efficiency. He loves talking about CompStat, the crime tracking system that the NYPD uses. And he says that he wants to make a CompStat for public housing and a CompStat for, the Department of Transportation and every other agency. So it's all about tracking and efficiency.
Which sounds almost Bloombergian.
It almost is, right. But it's at the same time, it's a different take on it because he is I guess he has some weird progressive, not weird, but some progressive instances too, some policies there. Stringer is full into the progressive side, and he, I think when you say government efficiency to him, he imagines cutting jobs, and he would probably be a little wary of that idea and that sense of things. He's following ideas like public power. He's talking about possibly rescinding Con Ed's monopoly on power in the city, and talking about reducing the NYPD's budget, not aggressively, not like $1 billion, but he wants to reduce the NYPD budget over time. So yes, both running on experience, but very different focuses on how government would run.
It is remarkable how much it pays to pay attention to the policy specifics, and then also the rhetoric. Because it's interesting how, Eric Adams, if he's being charged with, not being sufficiently left of center, he says, no, I mean, my campaign, my policies fulfill progressive aims. Andrew Yang says the same thing. Maybe we disagree on the policy specifics, but ultimately we all want the same thing. Do you sense that the progressives, whatever they may poll in this race, the progressives do have a significant stake in the race, such that everybody feels like they have to respond to what the progressives are doing, saying, or is that off?
No, I agree completely. And I guess this is a difficult conversation because the word progressive has become almost meaningless in the Democratic Party, just because everybody claims it and everybody,
maybe like infrastructure, but that's a whole other thing.
It's a good example.
Who knows what it means anymore? Yeah.
Everybody from AOC to Cuomo claims that they are the true progressive in the Democratic Party. But you're right. And look, Andrew Yang is always able to point to a universal basic income and say, oh, you don't think I'm progressive? Well, I, campaigned for president on this idea of giving everybody $1,000 a month. Come on. And Eric Adams, calls himself like the old school progressive or something like that, saying that he was pushing, for reform in the NYPD back when he was in the NYPD in the 90s. So yes, every candidate, even the ones that are considered more politically moderate, more big business friendly, are still calling themselves progressives. But the real left side of the Democratic Party, the what we might more honestly consider progressives, are really lining up behind Stringer, Wiley, and Morales. And there's been a lot of debate and mostly good-natured infighting on the left about whether everybody should try and coalesce behind one of them in order to defeat Yang and Adams, or whether they can put their trust in ranked choice voting and just say all the progressive voters of New York City can vote for one of these three. Just make sure that you rank all of them, and all the votes will flow to whoever's the best. And maybe that progressive hope would be able to defeat the more moderate Yang or Adams.
It's worth swinging to the complete other side and saying there are Republicans too, right? It's often easy to forget with all the candidates running for the Democratic primary, considering the sheer number of Democrats or share of Democrats in the city, that there are Republicans running, that Republicans have won, the mayoral seat before. Doesn't seem like they have the same kind of prospects this year, but give us a sense of how the Republican race is shaking out right now.
Sure. Yeah, I do not see the Republicans having a chance this year, barring some, crazy situation that comes before the general election. That said, there's a competitive primary right now. The Republicans also on June 22nd. The leading candidates there are Curtis Sliwa, he of the Guardian Angels and the Red Beret, and talk show host, really good name recognition around the city. And that's kind of his poll. He also notably did not vote for Donald Trump. So he's kind of an anti-Trump Republican. And then you have Fernando Mateo, who is a longtime businessman, was associated with the George W. Bush White House. I think he was a big fundraiser for W, but he did vote for Donald Trump. And I think that's going to be the big dividing line in the Republican primary that's coming on June 22nd is, are the Republicans going to go behind a Trump supporter or not? And but no matter, even if Sliwa does win, who did not vote for Trump, I have to see that in the general election, the Democratic winner is going to say, that guy's Trump, don't vote for him. And the Democrats probably going to win because of that.
Right. So in many respects, for better or worse, the real contest is likely to be June. It's going to be the June primary, not the general election. Nicole Jelinas, one of our colleagues here is wondering, what are the prospects of a complete, God forbid it happens, of a complete disaster that we on primary day, that we have to wait weeks for some kind of clear vision of who won in this primary? Is that a fear that we should have, or do you think we'll see the results pretty quickly?
So last I checked, the software to count ranked choice ballots has not yet officially been approved for the New York City Board of Elections. We're crossing our fingers. We're hoping that software gets approved, meaning that the votes will be able to be counted essentially instantly, and that we would have a good sense of the winner soon. And, then maybe there'd be a week waiting for absentee ballots to come in and that sort of thing. And we would.
Right. And this, by the way, the counting by the Board of Elections, which is known citywide as the most efficient department in the entire city.
Yes, incredibly slow. And so the alternative, if that software is not approved, or if there's a glitch or something, they might, in theory, have to hand count the ballots. We just saw a special election in the Bronx where only 5,000 voters voted, and it still took 3 weeks to officially determine a winner. For various reasons, the clock is going to be a little bit different in this mayoral primary, and hopefully the software will be approved. So I don't think we're going to have to wait a full 3 weeks, or God forbid even longer. But I will say this will probably be the most boring election night of all of our experience in New York, because we're not going to have a winner on election night. We're going to have a sense of who has the most first place votes, but they're not going to be able to run out the instant runoff situation for at least a few days. So, maybe for once I'll actually get a good amount of sleep on election night.
Well, I trust you always look on the bright side, and I too hope that we get a good kind of boring. We've had enough surprises over the past handful of months and years. Jeff, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining this conversation. I know that you'll be keeping a close watch of the mayoral race, and I encourage everybody to follow Jeff's reporting. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and thank you too for our audience for tuning in. I mean, if you liked what you saw, subscribe, support our work, follow our New York City Reborn campaign, read our mayoral playbook, but also join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be having another conversation as part of a week-long Ideas Summit. This one is on prioritizing New Yorkers' public safety or mayoral playbook. Please tune in. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you again to everybody, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Mike.